Muito bom dia a todos. Nós vamos dar sequência então ao nosso workshop. Hoje nós teremos a apresentação inicialmente das delegações de Quênia, Haiti, Gana e Chile. E essas apresentações vão ser feitas em inglês, tá? Nós estamos transmitindo isso pela internet também. Então eu quero começar chamando então o representante do Quênia para fazer a sua apresentação. Eu peço para todas as perguntas serem feitas através do microfone, tá? Para que a tradução possa acontecer e também para que os nossos espectadores pela internet possam receber essas perguntas também. Tá? Então nós vamos colocar o microfone de lapela no apresentador e nós vamos passar os microfones móveis para as perguntas. Então, so if I could have the Kenyan delegate. Pavel, is that you? If you use that, we will not be able to broadcast it. Meantime, let me just hook you up.
All right. I need to take this off.
Yep.
Yeah. Warm up.
Working? You have your microphone?
Yeah.
This pointer. And yeah, it's working. Please.
Good morning. I'm assuming all of you can understand English, so I'll proceed in English, not in Portuguese. So before I proceed, this is a presentation from the Kenyan team, basically on grid solar and wind scale-up as an integral part of our national energy strategies. But before I go there, I just want to present my favorite picture, the one you are seeing there. It is basically on sustainability, derived from a Native American proverb, which says that we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, but we borrow it from our children. Well, it's a very simple saying, but if you can imagine that our resources are not finite, they are infinite, they can be finished. So just imagine what will your grandchildren get. I will expect that your grandchildren will be there 100 years from now. So let's think about that and think about sustainability. This was presented on the first day, but I just want to emphasize that as a country, Kenya, we have a very renewable energy mix in our energy supply, or rather electricity supply. We have about 63% installed, and the generation counts close to 90% of what we consume as energy units. And we have a target of about to have universal access by 2020. Well, some have challenged this target. It's a political target, but sometimes it's good to aim higher. If you aim for the sun and get to the moon, it is still okay, because you'll have landed in the moon. But we hope to have universal access by 2020. It may also look ambitious, but if we look at the contribution of especially solar, and take it that you do not need to have grid electricity to be counted as having a universal access, then we will be making some progress as a country. But looking at the table on the far right, you can see hydro is about 37.5%. We have geothermal, which is our very critical resource that we want to exploit as a country. This accounts for about 26%. But generally, if you look through, you'll see that we are scaling up on wind. We currently at 1%. And the cogen, that's from Bagas, about 1%. Our interconnected systems account for about 98%. And generally, we are more renewables, you can see from that table. Our institutional structure is very important to understand how the country is structured. We have the Ministry of Energy, which is the overall ministry, which is in charge of policy formulation. We intentionally renamed it from Ministry of Energy to Ministry of Energy and Petroleum, because Kenya, we have a potential for petroleum now. And we want everybody to know that soon we'll also be a petroleum producing country. So the ministry is basically responsible for policy formulation, setting necessary legal and regulatory framework for the subsector, and overall supervision role to ensure policies are implemented. Then closely we have the Energy Regulatory Commission, which is responsible for technical and economic regulation of the sector. And these include tariff reviews and setting, licensing, and advisory role to the Ministry of Energy on policy issues. So basically, the regulator is there. Then we have the utility, the Kenya Power and Lighting Company. They do a bit of transmission, but currently distribution, which is major, supply, dispatch, and interconnect grid system operation. That's currently the framework, but there is plan to change where they don't do system operation. We currently revising our Energy Act. Once that is done, we hope that the transmission company or any other entity that has the capacity to do system operation will be responsible. But that's the current framework. This utility is owned by the government, about 50.1%. The rest, 49% or so, is private. So in all aspects, this is a commercial company. They are driven by commercial interests, not other interests. We have also the Kenya Generating Company, which is the biggest generating company in Kenya, with several power stations. It's also 70% government owned, which means that 30% is private owned. So it's basically largely a government owned company. We have also what we call the Geothermal Development Company, which is government owned, fully 100% government owned, and is responsible for exploration, drilling of wells to harness geothermal potential for power generation. The main purpose for setting up the GDC was basically to lower the risk of geothermal explorations. As a private company, if you're going to drill a geothermal well and incur about $7 million US, and you find it's a dry well, it is a big impact on the private companies. So this is meant to take off the risk from the private companies, such that the government takes that risk of exploration and drilling, whereby the companies come and invest in a power plant and they're assured of steam supply. So this has also done well, and we expect in the coming years to benefit as a country. We have also the Rural Electrification Authority. It's also a government agency charged with enhancing power access and connectivity in rural areas. Sometimes if we look at the utility, which is almost 50% government owned and almost 50% private, as I mentioned, they are driven on commercial, or they are basically a commercial company, and therefore they will not extend to a grid to an area they think they're not going to make money. Therefore, the Rural Electrification Authority is there to ensure that the areas that are even not verifiable are actually supplied with electricity. So they do the distribution and also do some of the mini grids. So this is a very important aspect. It's fully funded by the government. We have the Kenya Electricity Transmission Company, KETRACO, also fully government-owned, which is responsible for developing of new transmission lines to enhance connectivity. The areas you want to move the power from, evacuate the power. And basically the government is in charge of that to ensure that the transmission lines are available, to ensure that the power is moved to the load centers. We have also independent power producers, IPPs, basically private companies. Of course, the Kenyan is there, 70% government owned. The IPPs basically are ensuring that they generate power and sell it to the Kenya Power and Lighting Company through power purchase agreements. And most of them are connected to the national interconnected grid. We have also isolated power mini grids owned by Government of Kenya, operated by KPLC. We have privately owned mini grids, which basically some are for own use. We'll be seeing some of them, and some are public. Public means they can sell power to the larger public. So basically that is the power structure in Kenya. The licenses issued so far, we have the main utility, which is Kenya Power and Lighting Company, which has 1 transmission license, 4 distribution licenses, basically in the areas mentioned, Nairobi, Coast, Mount Kenya, West Kenya, and they have also 17 permits for operating isolated power stations and their distribution grids. Basically, this means that although this is the leading, almost the sole utility, it doesn't mean that they have a blanket license to distribute power in Kenya. Other companies can come in and they can be given licenses for specific regions to maybe generate and distribute power. We have KETRACO, they have 1 transmission license, which is the Kenya Electricity Transmission Company. We have KenGen, which has 20 licenses and 6 permits for generation. We have independent power producers, which have 23 licenses and permits. Then we have private licenses for own use. James Finlay, Sotik Tea, Sotik Island, Unilever. The first 3 are basically tea growing and processing companies in Kenya. They are in areas where they have potential for hydros, small hydros, and basically they have licenses to generate and distribute for own use. Then we have Osarian, which is a flour company. They also have a license. So basically, as I mentioned, this is allowable. You can get a license in Kenya to generate and use power on your own. Then we have distribution permits for Power Hive. And also there is one company called Talek Power Company, which again have a permit to generate and distribute power within the area they have been assigned. So the supply and demand in Kenya, we really not, when you compare to other developing countries, we have a current effective power generation capacity of 2,298 megawatts, which is composed of about 820 hydro, 598 geothermal, 740 of thermals, which includes 30 megawatt of emergency power. We have a Greco still supplying us with power, and a cogen of 26 megawatt from gas, and a wind of about 25.5. Our peak demand is currently about close to 1,600 megawatts. This was recorded in August. So one of the challenges which I'll be lighting is lack of demand. Our plans for generation seems to be going well, but demand is the biggest challenge we have as a country. How do we grow demand to balance the generation? As a country, we do a lot of the power sector planning. We have what we call the least cost power development plan. So this gets investment in the power sector, and basically the objective is to ensure that we are developing power generation from what gives us the least cost of our generation tariff. We will give preference whatever is cheapest. So the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum procures power through the Public Procurement and Disposal Act of 2005. This is very important because public procurement is a very sensitive issue. We have also the Energy Act that guides the sector in terms of, this is the legal framework for the energy sector. And as I mentioned, this is currently under review. A few things will change, but basically, the way it is will not change much. We'll still have the unbundled power structure. We have also the Public-Private Procurement Act of 2013. Again, this is closely, we use it closely because any public-private investment in Kenya have to conform to the PPP Act. It gives guidelines how you can develop power projects, and how this is interrelated to the Energy Act is a very important act in terms of private sector investment in Kenya. It's a recent act, it's about 2 years or so. We're trying to come up with various ways to ensure that there is no conflict between the two acts in the country. So as I mentioned, KPLC is the off-taker and basically implementing agency. PPAs, they signed PPAs with the generators. Basically, for you to sell power in Kenya, you must have a PPA. It's a very important document. That is what comes first before even you set up your power plant. And again, this is a private agreement, private agreement between the generator and the utility to take the power once you have generated the power. So it's a very, very important document because without it, you cannot even get financing. We have also the feed-in tariff, which promotes procurement of renewable energy projects through, again, is managed by a feed-in tariff committee, which is basically composed of key government agencies, the Ministry, Kenya Power, ERC, and the Geothermal Development Company. We are also in the process of considering auctions for renewable energy resources. While we have potential for renewable energy resources, we just don't want to give it to you on a first-come, first-served basis. We're working on a framework where we want to get value for money. You bid to develop a site, and the one who bids the least tariff, generation tariff, will get the site. And this, I think, will commence with the wind, because we have now wind atlas. Thereafter, I think we'll move to solar and others. Although we're still in discussion with the consultant, we may have a hybrid of two, where we retain some resources under feed-in tariff policy, and some resources like wind, probably, and solar could be done through auctions. So this is work in progress. Maybe by next year we'll be clear as a country whether which resources are going for auctions, which ones are going to remain under the feed-in tariff policy. This is partly has been presented. You can see our generation of electricity from July to September 2015. The blue line is July. If you look at through what came from hydro, about 300 in geothermal, we had about 350 megawatt, and diesel, we had about less than 150. So this tells you, I mentioned the 87%. We're having close to 90% of our energy coming from renewables. Then you can see the same in August, almost the same trend, and in September. So roughly, non-renewables are accounting for about close to 12% of our total generation, while renewables is almost close to 88–90% of our total electricity generated. And our objective is basically to really scale up that until we plans to have a coal plant and other non-renewables, but for now, the country is very, very renewable. We also have what we call the feed-in tariff, which I mentioned, basically, first introduced in 2008, reviewed in 2010 and 2012, and currently also under review. As much as we are talking about energy auctions or renewable energy auctions, we want to review the current policy. It's basically reviewed every 3 years. And our feed-in tariff policy is technology specific. We have solar, wind, geothermal, biomass, and biogas. We have also standardized PPAs. If you come to invest in Kenya in power, basically there is a guiding document, a standard PPA, which gives you the structure of the agreement. Again, we normally say this is not very fixed. There are areas you can negotiate on, and areas that are obvious you don't need to spend time on. It also, the feed-in tariff policy gives connection guidelines, and for information, we have about 11 US cents for wind. Previously, it was 12 US cents. If you look through the internet, you see Turkana wind is at 12. They negotiated before the 2012 December review, so they have 12 US cents. Solar is at 12 US cents currently. I'm not very sure whether it will go down or go up, but chances are it won't go up because we are keen on having our average generation tariff should be actually below 10 US cents. That's the government target. Currently it's quite high. It's about 14 to 15, but we want to have it low. The main purpose for that is to ensure that we're encouraging, we are attracting heavy investments in industry. Our tariff is really high compared to other countries like South Africa and Egypt, although they are subsidized, but they still give us a run for our money in terms of investment. So the target is top. So I don't think the solar will go basically up. It may actually be reduced depending on what the review committee will come up with. The tariffs are not viewed as competitive. We are at a very different scenario in Kenya because the power generators who are coming in, they want better tariffs. If you give them like solar 15, they'll be very happy. But then people are coming to consume the power. They say our tariffs are very high. So the government has to do a balancing act. The investors want it cheap. Investors in industry who want to use the power, they want cheap power. The people coming in to generate the power, the IPPs, want it higher. So it's a balancing act. You have to ensure that we are at a position whereby we attract both. I mentioned about the power auctions. I don't want to dwell on that. Briefly on electricity subsector investment requirements, we have what we call the medium-term plan, 2015 to 2020. And we are hoping to increase our demand, peak demand from about 1,500, which was in 2014, to about 2,800 megawatt by 2020. We also hope to have an installed capacity increased from 2,200 thereabout to about 6,766. You can see there is a disparity. Our peak is meant to be about 3,000, while our generation by 2020 is supposed to be about almost 7,000. So as I mentioned, our biggest challenge as a country, we need to match generation and demand. Else, this power typically has a component called capacity charge, where you are paid some minimum amount of money to have your plant there. So we should be very careful as a country because we may end up paying a lot of money as a capacity charge. And the net effect of that is that we have, instead of our generation tariffs coming down, not generation but overall tariff, we may have it going up. So this is the medium-term plan, but the government is very keen to make sure that they're matching the two. There are a number of flagship projects coming up to ensure that we boost our demand. And we're also planning to have a special cities within the generation hub, especially in the Naivasha area where we are having geothermal, where we have an industrial park. You get the generation tariff, not the overall, the end user tariff, to set up your processing factory in that area. So all this, we hope that by 2020, we will have balanced the two to ensure that our generation matches with the demand. What is expected in terms of funds required to invest? We need about 15.6 billion to do the generation expansion. We need about 4 billion or so for transmission. It's obvious the government financing is not adequate. We'll need private sector to come in and finance. And the government will fund transmission special network as well as steam exploration, the GDC mentioned. Basically, we need a lot of private sector investment if we have to achieve these targets. The money will not come from the government. A small portion will come from the government. The success in independent power producers in Kenya, we have about 10 independent power producers. We have about 6 IPPs using what we call the medium speed DSL engines. We have 1 IPP in geothermal power generation. We have 1 cogen license permit issued. We have 1 solar IPP, which is the Strathmore University. I think it has been mentioned here, about 600 kilowatt peak, and we have 1 biogas license. So basically in Kenya, private sector can come in and invest and have their own license. It's not limited to 1 entity to generate the power. That's a very, very important development. We're also expecting new IPPs, 3 big wind projects, and other new small plants to be commissioned within that medium-term plan of 2015 to 2020. And we also expect geothermal power plants. That's from coal. We have geothermal, we have coal, we have solar. The very important development, which is very important for investors, is that Kenya Power has always paid what's due. This is very, very critical. Anybody who has a PPA signed, our utility has always honored payments. So this is very, very important. We have a table there. This is what our economists are calling a delayed scenario, up to from 2015 to 2020. And you can see the various technologies: hydro, thermal, heavy fuel oil, solar, imports, about the 400 expected in 2018 from Ethiopia. We have biogas generation. We have geothermal coming in. We have coal expected in 2019. So this is part of our planning. Basically, we also, as a country, is one of the countries we are proud of our plans. So though sometimes we don't meet them 100%, but it's good to have plans as a country. You can see the total generation expected from 2015 to 2020, and the forecasted demand, which, as we have mentioned, it's not going hand in hand. We are not balancing demand and generation, but we expect that we will work around that to ensure that we do not have too much installed capacity which we cannot actually consume. The table will give us the mix. Basically, if you look at from 2015 to 2020, it gives the percentage contribution of each technology towards the final mix. So that table is available. Like now, if you take solar, by 2020 we expect about 1.1. Although I expect a change from that because there are a number of pipeline solar. Number of projects that have been given approval to do visibility studies, quite a number. So solar being quick to deploy, we will expect by 2020 the scenario is not going to be at 1.1. I expect it to be higher, and maybe John will come to tell me. If all goes well and we have a lot of base load, we expect solar to do well. If you look at wind, we expect by 2020 to be about 11%. 2018 is about 14%. There are a number of wind projects on the pipeline. Some have already broken ground, so we expect a lot of development in that area. This has been inserted. This is a map from the ministry on the annual solar installation. The dark side is where we have a lot of solar potential towards the north, like Turkana, where we have the wind. So basically, we have a very good wind resource as a country. We have a good, not wind, but solar resource as a country. That's the annual installation of solar. And as I mentioned, we expect a lot of development because solar is quick to deploy. The price of PV is coming down tremendously. And we expect it to be a big contributor in terms of our energy. It will not be the 1.1%, it must be higher than that. I have also a pet project, which I like mentioning because most of the information we present is also available online. We have the Renewable Energy Portal, supported by the World Bank, IFC. So this portal, in a brief, is basically a one-stop shop informational portal that will give you a requirement in terms of permitting, in terms of the regulatory, legal, and policy framework of our country, Kenya. And it is really biased towards renewable energy generation, renewable energy utilization for electricity. And currently, GZ, we are in discussion to see whether they can support the upgrade. We wanted to enhance it more. So as I mentioned, it's a one-stop shop where you don't need, if you go online, you'll be able to know which government agencies are involved in renewable energy licensing and permitting. And we often give specific contacts who you need to contact, and we tell you how much it costs to get this permit or license. And it also gives you sort of a diagram to show you how you need to progress. You need to come from your expression of interest, how you get until you are generating your power. So it's a very useful informational portal. Opportunities. There is a lot of appetite for private sector participation in the power sector. There is a lot of interest. We have a lot of resources as a country. The revenue requirement, and there is an attractive return on equity. We have a growing economy. While if you look at throughout the world, we have stagnating economies, 1-2%. Kenya, we are doing over 5%. Between 5 to 7% growth. We have those challenges of budget deficit, and the debt is a major constraint. There's deemed energy generation payments from renewable energy projects. That's a challenge. And basically, that covers the presentation from the Kenyan team. And we have a very experienced team here. So if you have any questions, feel free to interact with us or ask after the sessions.
Okay. Do we have questions? Is this mic working? Yes. It is, okay. Well, while you think about your questions, I have a question. In your plan, could you go back to your third last slide? One more, yeah. You are projecting here that you will go coal from 0 to 20%. No, that's not the one. Where you have the shares.
Yeah, we have
but
coal.
In any case.
It's the next slide. No.
Okay, 0 to 20% in 5 years, and solar 0 to 1% in 5 years. When you compare the cost of generation for coal and solar, how do they compare in Kenya?
As I mentioned, solar, we will looking at about 12 US cents, the generation cost. Coal is about 7.2 US cents.
Okay, and the expectation of having kind of twice or
Upset. There is another major investment in towards our coastal city of Mombasa, or the coastal area of Kenya, that require a lot of power. But the main objective of having the coal, and I'm sure the economists will explain to you, is that the weight intensive industries.
Which wants cheap power?
Yeah, who want cheap power. And as I mentioned, South Africa currently they have an average of about 5, is it 5 or so? Or less than that. Egypt the same. They're really competing. Most of the heavy energy intensive industries are either in Egypt, South Africa, and other countries. So the purpose of this is basically not renewable, but to make sure that our overall weighted average generation tariff is down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The aspect of coal was also to buy time for geothermal, because the drilling of the wells had reached a kind of a stagnation while KTC was picking up, and as in Kenyan work was mainly in putting out the power plants, like recently commissioned 280 megawatts of geothermal. And it takes quite some time to drill like 200 megawatts, and we wanted to have like 5,000 megawatts from geothermal to create a window for solar and for wind. So the coal is basically a stopgap measure And as my colleague has indicated, we are also targeting like industrial parks where we have the load centers, like where we have the coal plant, we'll have an industrial park there to consume most of the power. And where we have a lot of geothermal, we'll also have an industrial park there to consume most of the power. Then we have a lapset corridor for the new oil that we have discovered. And commercializing the oil will also take some time. So those are some kind of projected loads that by the time we start commercial pumping of oil, the coal plant will be ready. We will have resort cities on that transport corridor. We will have also some airports, and then we will have also a railway line, as my colleague has said.
Okay. And what's the cost of the geothermal?
Geothermal is around 7 US cents,
Yeah.
Okay.
approximately.
Yeah, cool. Okay.
But the government is taking the upstream risk of drilling.
Sure.
Yeah, so at least the investors only take the risk of putting out the power plant.
Thank you.
I'd like to get some perspective from you. What's the unit cost of power from the coal power plant that we saw yesterday?
Oh, I have no idea. It's subsidized. But the new generation, that plant is many decades.
Well,
But the new generation being installed in Brazil is being auctioned at about $70 to $100 per megawatt hour. And the most competitive right now is wind. The 3 auctions that we have for solar are still dedicated auctions, so they only work because they are dedicated. They have a special price, and the last one just happened last week, selling for just under $100 per megawatt hour.
the discussion I'd like to have, we say we'd like to have a candid discussion, is we've had that discussions with my colleagues. And I think even though we've not done coal before, is yes, we'd like to have cheap power to industrialize, but we'd also like to be realistic. And if we don't have a good sounding board to check our numbers, then we end up in a dirty situation. Maybe, yes, the tender, the offer is 7 cents, but you cannot do coal for 7 cents. So whoever is accepting that is cheating everyone. And that's the message. We'd like to, look at a bit further. Are we really going the right way, or are we thinking we are going the right way when we know we are going the wrong way?
Yeah, good point.
Maybe to add to this good point, in addition, we do have to look at the vintage price of PV, right? It's not enough to actually look at the current price of coal and PV in Kenya, for instance, but to take this decision on when to scale up PV versus coal versus others. Obviously, you have total generation mix modeling that you need at some point, but at these low shares of PV, that's not what you should worry about. But what you can look at is the simple price curve, the experience curve, the learning curve that shows how the PV levelized energy costs have come down over the last 5 years, and then you can project that roughly how it will come down over the next 5 years or 10 years. And less insecurity where the PV prices will be and where the wind prices will be in 2, 3, 5, 10 years. And that should be the basis for that decision.
Thank you.
Maybe just a comment on
Sure.
the same. Initially, our planning has not considered FIT projects into the national planning. But I think from this year or last year, all these projects are being considered as part of the national plans, and they're modeled to see the impact. And probably, as you said, we need to have a closer look at the call, because this was an auction. It was not just the competitively bid and the obligation fee at the same 12 US cents. And 1-2 years ago, there was nothing. But again, we are very cautious because we want to see who is moving from the expression of interest to negotiating PPAs. We have about almost 5 or so, actually, who are beginning to move and negotiate PPAs, about 4. projects. So again, they are not small projects. There are 40, 50 megawatt of solar. So we expect a big contribution. But again, we do now, we had a 3-year plan, the LCPDP plan. There is an annual plan that is done and reviewed. All these things, we keep on refining our projected national plans. They are not static. They are not also fixed. If the scenario changes next year, we'll be having of our energy mix. So John is there. He heads the planning division. Maybe he can also make a comment on this.
I'll add very little because I think you have covered most of the issues. But one of the reasons why we were looking for base load, and base load, you get base load. Geothermal is one of the technologies giving us base load. Also hydro, although sometimes because of seasonalities, and then the coal, because one of the studies that we have been doing on connecting renewables into the system, because sometimes of the intermittent nature of the renewable technologies, and I think I've been observing even the case of Brazil. Even find, first of all, you need base load if you are going to accommodate. In fact, that is where planners are accused of sort of looking at the base load and arguing that for us to take on board, to increase even our renewables to 20% of the total mix, is good to have actually a stable base load. And where do you get it? Right now, and that's why we were going the coal way. Because when you look at our mix, we are saying, okay, we are not that dirty, but you don't want to be dirty. If there are other technologies, in fact, we are even looking at LNG, the natural gas. But apparently, that auction, we could not get somebody who could give us the tariff we desired. So that project sort of has not kicked off. But we have discovered some gas somewhere. So the government is now planning generating using own LNG. But we are very, the way we look at it, we don't want to also to dirty our mix. We also still want to remain as the world leaders in the way that our power mix is. And what you'll observe is that instead of going for another stable coal, so also again planning, and what we are doing is mainstreaming renewable energy projects. We are saying we can get more energy from some of these other technologies.
Just quickly, I think this is a really important point too, the question about coal versus other thermal alternatives, and that's where this power sector planning comes in that we discussed before and the days before. Ultimately, we all know that the simple, the first estimate for your levelized energy cost, if you don't think about base load versus peak load and the whole fluctuation of PV, for instance, by the time this coal plant will probably come on board, the simple look at the levelized cost of energy will show you that by then it will be lower for PV, much lower, right, than the 7 cents. And indeed, that's where you can then say, well, but it doesn't provide baseload, right? And then you have to see how much PV can you put in, given the baseload you already have and the hydro you already have. So it doesn't matter. It can be treated like baseload up to a certain amount of share. So you need to know that. But then if it's that cheap and you go above that, that has an impact on your decision. Right? The moment you have high shares, you're in 10 years, the government decides, well, we need now high shares of PV because it's so cheap to allow you to address that flexibility issue of you might services that coal cannot, and that hydro and gas might. Right? So it is a tricky decision you have to take.
Okay, so thank you, Pavel. I think we'll now move on to Heidi. Okay, we go with Ghana first and then Haiti.
Hello.
Zone.
It is on. Yeah. Okay. Is the mic on? Yes, it's on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, good morning. Yeah. So I'll be doing a brief presentation on our experience with solar in a part of in Ghana. Located just above the currently about 75% of its populace has access to, which sets the policy direction for the nation. And then reporting to it, directly to it, as you have the Energy Commission, which is in charge of technical regulation of the power sector. And then you have the PURC, the Public Utilities and Regulatory Council, which is in charge of economic regulation. Then at the power system, you have the generators, the transmitter, and the distributors. Bulk of the generation actually comes from, so bulk of the generation comes from VRA, which is the Volta River Authority. And in one of the slides, I'll show you the map of which the Volta River Authority you have 2 dams on the Volta Lake, of which you have a total generation of about 1,580. You have 3 main hydro dams and a number of thermal plants. Then Gridco does the transmission, and you have 2 main distributors within the country. You have the Electricity Company of Ghana, which does distribution in the southern part, and the Northern Electricity Department, which does, Northern Electricity Distribution Company, which does distribution in the northern sector of the country. Well, in Ghana, the existing hydro plants are not considered as renewable. Per our grid code, it's hydros which are below 100 megawatts, which are considered as renewable plants. This is a breakdown of the various generations that we have. That's the map. Okay, so the very first few ones, these are all thermal plants. This one here is an IPP. The rest most of them are owned by government. Some of them are joint ventures between Ghana and a private company. This is also government. But these 3 are the hydro dams that I talked about. Bui is run by a different entity, though it's also government owned. But the Akosombo and Pong dams can be found at this part. So they're making use of the Volta Lake here. The Bui Dam is found around here. Then you have quite a number of the thermal plants, along the coast on this portion. Okay, so for now, the 2014 generation mix, you had about 65% on hydro and then 35% on thermal. We have some sort of intermittent exchange with Cote d'Ivoire, which is on our extreme left, to the east of the country. But in terms of renewables, we have something probably less than 1%. You have installed capacity of approximately, this was as of 2015, 26 megawatts. You have a significant 2.5 megawatts located up north, but it's off-grid. You have a 715 kilowatt plant located in one of the universities in the country. And you have these pockets of off-grid renewable plants. This just gives us an idea of the voltage levels and the transformer capacities that we have. For transmission, we operate between the voltage level of 69 to 330 kilovolts. Well, one of our major challenges has been the fact that we have a lot of installed capacity, but this capacity is not usually available due to problems that we have with fuel sources. I'm sure you realize that most of our plants are thermal plants, but even for the hydro dams, because our thermal plants have not been so reliable, we've had to, along the line, overdraft the lakes that our dams are situated on. And then also we have very little or no reserve margin for system contingencies. Well, a short overview on renewable energies in Ghana. We have small, medium hydro plants with capacities less than 1% up to 100%. We have about total potential of about 100 megawatts, which are listed all over the country. Solar energy, it's at meters squared. And for wind, average wind speeds between 6.4 meters per second and 8.8 meters per second. So given roughly about 5,600 megawatts. We have two main seasons in the country. We have the wet season and the dry season. And the wet season up north is between April and September. And that for the dry season up north is October to March. Relatively, the northern part of the country is relatively drier than the south. So in 2011, renewable energy law was enacted. And as part of it, it said that by 2020, we are supposed to have 10% of the country's energy mix being that renewables. But a feed-in tariff was actually announced in 2013. At the moment, but this renewable policy is under the general framework of granting the country universal access to electricity by 2016. As already explained, the PURC is the one who sets the tariffs. They have the power to set the feed-in tariff. And the distribution companies and bulk consumers are obligated to wheel that power, all the renewable power which is going to be produced. Okay, and this feed-in tariff is to be guaranteed for 10 years and reviewed every 2 years. These are feed-in tariff values. Unfortunately, they are in Ghana pesos per kilowatt hour. The peso is, so you have 100 pesos making up a cedi. At the moment, the exchange rate, you have $1 to approximately 4 Ghana cedis. Okay, and the solar feed-in tariff here is about 40.2 Ghana pesos per kilowatt hour, with that of the mini hydros being about 22.7, and wind 32 pesos per kilowatt hour there. Well, these are some projects, about 3 megawatts grid-connected residential commercial institutions. And off-grid projects, you have about 6.25 million Ghanaians without access to national grid. At the moment, the Energy Commission has given about 36 operational licenses. That when you total, you're looking at about 3,900, approximately 4,000 megawatts of solar. There are opportunities, as I explained, in terms of the seasons that we have in the nation. We have very high solar irradiation during the dry season. We have quite a number of rivers which have been earmarked for for mini hydros, but we have inadequate water. So there is that possibility of having solar energy to supplement the generation which we are going to be getting from hydro. This map gives us an indication of the renewable potential of the nation. I don't know if it's too clear, but the brown spots are the potential wind sites, and the contours indicates the levels of irradiation in the various parts of the country. And as said already, the northern part of the nation has more solar potential than that south. I think I've talked about this, that you have about 2.5, which has been installed in Avrongo. Avrongo is this part of the country. You have a 2.5. You currently have about 20 megawatts which has been installed around here. It has not yet been connected, but it's going to be off-grid. And then somewhere in the capital, you have 715 kilowatts. So this is a breakdown: 44 solar PVs, 110 biomass, 7 wind, and there's currently a developer who, well, he has a very ambitious target of generating about 1,000 megawatts from tidal. It's ongoing, but nothing significant has been realized so far. I wanted to show here the number of applications or the status of some of the solar applications that we have so these are the applicants that we received, but for me the significant thing here is the capacities that people are seeking to generate from solar. So you have some coming with 20, 75, some coming with as much as 2,000, saying that they've seen that potential for 2,000 megawatts of solar. So this is somewhere around the coast. You have 155 located somewhere in the western region of Ghana. And almost on a daily basis, as the grid operator, we are battered with a lot of these applications every day. I'll talk a bit about the challenges getting to the latter stage, but we must say that we find some of the figures a bit ridiculous. You know, I mean, if you have somebody saying he wants to put 155 megawatts, wants to put 400 megawatts of solar, and look at this, that's 2,000 megawatts. Currently, the total installed capacity of the nation is about 2,800. And if someone says he's going to put 2,000 in your system of renewable energy, it brings up a lot of concern there. So as I wrap this up, the challenges. Well, one of the challenges has been difficulty in securing financing for renewable energy plants, and this is applicable to both off-grid and on-grid. A major challenge we have is the lack of the financial credibility of the major off-taker, which is the electricity company of Ghana. Now this, like I said, is the major distributor within the southern part of the country, but it's saddled with so much debt. One of the problems being that it's government-owned, and so government is reluctant to settle its own debts when it makes use of the power. And so the ECG owes the transmitter, not the transmission company, owes a lot of the generation companies. At the moment, there is some extensive reforms. It is expected by the end of the first half of the year, ECG would have been privatized, you know, and we're hoping that that will bring about some sort of sanity within the power sector. Then there's a difficulty in securing government guarantees. Most of the developers come and they're asking for government guarantees, and it's mostly because of the lack of the financial credibility of the ECG. Weak tariff structure, and challenges in implementing RE policies. With respect to securing government guarantees and things, I know that, so what the government has sought to do, and I know they're doing that with GIZ and a company called Castelia, where they are putting on tender about 20 megawatts. You're going to say, we're going to put that on tender, and people who are interested should put in a bid for that. And you're going to do that with the feed-in tariff in mind. And that's supposed to be the first start, the initial start to get things going, to encourage some people to come into the RE business. Because though we have a lot of applications, you have very few people who have actually started with construction or implementation stuff. These also are some challenges. The high perceived risk, investor risk in Ghana's renewable sector. The state of the current network to accommodate renewable energies. Like I said, we have such huge figures, and there's reluctance for us to take all those figures because of the state of our current network. I think one of the major problems we face is lack of technical expertise and capacity. It's a very new field. I think that when it comes to conventional energy, conventional generation, Ghana has been doing that for, say, the past 50 years, and so it has that expertise, but it's very green when it comes to renewables. And so there's a lot of hesitancy. People are not, nobody's too sure where we're going. It's like we're moving within a tunnel. We know we'll get there, but we don't know how we're going to get there. And so we're trying all sort of things, and nobody wants to stick out his head and take a decision. We are just hoping that we'll get there gradually. We think for some key requirements for increased reintegration, well, to have accurate weather forecasting. This I speak from the point of the transmitter company, the grid operator. Accurate weather forecasting tools for the system control center. We don't have anything of that sort at the moment. And if we're going to be dependent on renewables, which are highly dependent on the state of the weather, that's necessary. Like I said earlier, we don't have adequate spinning reserves to support renewables at the moment. A need for network security management systems and adequate voltage regulatory devices at strategic locations. And I can't help but re-emphasize the need for intellectual capacity when it comes to renewables. In conclusion, we are committed to sustaining efforts at building a strong grid to make the grid more intelligent. We are involved in engaging stakeholders on issues relating to spinning reserve, but in relation to RE integration on a whole. And we have also been committed to building capacity in these technologies applications. So I think, thank you very much. Thank you.
Here in Brazil, there's a big challenge with drafts in the recent years and the reduction of this, the energy output of the hydro. Do you have faced the same challenges in Ghana, or is it quite stable there because of the global warming and everything? Things might change.
I think we're facing serious troubles, serious challenges with respect to that. I can't speak on the global warming part, but I think it's more man-made. Like I explained earlier, you usually start the year with a generation mix that you're going to do this percentage of thermal and this percentage of hydro. But along the line, one of your thermal plants will fail, or you don't have some fuel. The main sources of our gas are from the West Africa Power. There's this gas pipeline which comes from Nigeria, or our own Ghana gas development. And so when it happens like that, you have to rely more on the hydro. Akosombo has to generate more. At the moment, we are running about 5 out of the 6 units at a water level where we should be running just about 3. But then it's an issue of governmental influence versus what the engineering actually says. So our reservoir has really, really suffered. And there are a lot of fears right now about next year because there's not enough time for the reservoir to recover. And next year is going to be a very tough one for us.
Same problem everywhere.
Yeah, but this gives you the chance for building relatively small PV units in a short period, because with the PV is not your peak shaving at the time, but what you can do on the other side is just fill up the dam somehow, so you are more flexible with time schedule. This gives a strong impact towards relatively small units.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think, like I was saying, it's an issue of intellectual capacity here. It's the uncertainty. It's the fact that it's not been done before, and people are very, very hesitant about that. I can tell you that the response right now to the energy crisis we are facing has been the purchase of very expensive thermal units. As a matter of fact, tomorrow, a 250 megawatt barge is docking in Ghana. And everybody's like, well, the government is excited. But it doesn't change anything because it's still the same fuel sources that we're going to use. And we have argued that our problem is not capacity, it's the availability of the plants. And so although we're going to have a barge and and some other temporary or emergency plants are going to come on, the issue of fuel still stays. But I don't think that there is good direction when it comes to renewables in the country. I don't think people are on top of it and know exactly what it is. Or it's either we do know, but we don't have the strong political will to go about what we have to do.
Just quickly, we'll present later today, right, on more advanced modeling of these questions. But I think what you both just mentioned is something that should always be present. It's a very simple finding, but we keep forgetting it when doing the math. If the capacity is not there yet, and you can rest assured this is not specific to Ghana. This is the case for all governments in the world. Even the leading pioneer countries, right, in Europe and the US and other BRIC countries which are following now, even they don't have quantitative solid methods yet that can tell them in an empirical way what's the optimal path for introduction, right? But if that capacity is lacking, that what you call intellectual, I would rather call it availability of readily usable decision tools. That to me is the problem, right? Because it's not intellectual capacity that's lacking. You have that. It's just have an array of methods. A power plant, it costs less than making the same mistake with a big power plant. And that sounds like an oxymoron or whatever, but it's key to starting quick but small, right? Like the startups say, fail often but fail inexpensive. And the other reason is because we said 2 days ago that to keep, when we discussed on-grid a little prematurely, but because it was so much interest, that we want more value added in the country. Right? We want all this installation, all these electricians who can work on it. We want that, a maximum of that in the country. And before you think about rules and regulation to get that, a very simple way to allow an optimum or maximum amount of local content in the value you generate chain of solar and wind is, again, you should start small, because that way your local companies can learn too. So those are all reasons why this decentralized character for starters, not for the countries that are already doing it. Then you can decide on purely economic grounds, whether you do utility scale or small or the two of them. But if you start, don't wait. Start small, like you did with the 2 megawatt one. And yes, there will be things that are not optimal, but we saw yesterday that even in such advanced countries as Brazil, on PV now, you still learn with each and every installation you do. Georg, who's been installing for 20 years and more now, still learns with every installation. So start early and start small, but with many small plans.
Thank you.
It's a comment more for the workshop than for my colleague. And my comment is, he mentioned that in Ghana, that they're defining hydro only up to 100 megawatts as renewable. And I tend to see this dilemma even in other parts. I've been privileged to work on the energy policy. And we had similar challenges when we were working on the policy on how to classify some of those resources. I don't know what the experience in Brazil and Chile and other parts, where the large hydro is, when you talk of renewables, people are only looking at solar and wind, which I think might even fight the cause of solar. Because we had some presentation from some colleagues from GIZ who are talking of virtual plants, where you have a solar plant works together with a hydro plant, and instead of pumping the water from the hydro plant, you generate more from the solar plant, and then you store the water from the hydro. So you are actually integrating the solar with the hydro in a virtual sense, not in a physical sense. So if we start limiting the capacity of hydro, which is renewable, then we're actually fighting the cause of solar.
Just a very quick reaction, because I'm very much agreeing to this. And after these country presentations and the break, you will see that GIZ has actually started to apply methods to quantify this effect. You can now show the added value in dollars per megawatt hour that you get from this effect. Everybody knows it exists, but now it's time to quantify it so we can take these decisions.
I have a question. You showed us that your energy demands are increasing 13% year on year. Is that due to more to residential, commercial, industrial? What's the main integer?
I think it's more industrial. But then we also realize that you have a significant percentage of suppressed load.
Sorry?
Of suppressed load. You have a significant percentage
Okay,
of
suppressed
suppressed load.
Okay.
About 18 to 20%. And so at any point in time when you're getting more generation resources, people just pick up.
Sure.
So anytime, and so I think it's one of the factors which is driving the rise. But then there's quite a lot of industrial growth as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
To respond regarding the Chilean case about what's in the hydro technology, what is considered renewable and what is not, the threshold is about 20 megawatts installed capacity. From 9 to 20, you have incentives. You have a linear increase of paying tolls. Under 9, you don't pay any transmission tolls. Over 20 megawatts, it's not renewable. Hydro.
And the other energies, wind or solar?
And biomass. Well, it's based on the capacity of regulation of a run-of-river plant. If you have a large capacity of regulation of the water, then it's considered that it has a larger impact on the environment. If you just can't regulate the generation, it's considered that you just take a little bit of water and you generate. That could be the starting point from it.
Okay, so we thank Ben once more. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
So Haiti is up. Laser for
Okay. Good morning, everyone. And greetings from IT. Actually, I'm Karine. So you can see my name right here. I'm here to tell you about SREP. How this is. Just to have you in the context, contrary of our colleagues from Ghana and Brazil and Chile, or even Kenya, we have this challenge here in IT, only 30% of electrification rate. So our big challenge is providing electricity to 60% of our population. We have this intensive use of fuel, wood, and charcoal, high dependence on fossil fuel, because our rate of energy producing is something like 59% from thermal. Aging and fragile infrastructure, high technical commercial losses, institutional, legal, and regulatory framework limitations, economic and financial constraints, and capacity and information constraints. This is, and we have, you can see there, our capacity and potential in biomass. It is something like 200 megawatt, wind is 100 megawatt, and solar is far more than 300 megawatt, because we have something like 7 hours of radiation per day in average. It can be more or less. And our hydro potential is 250 megawatt, and we are actually using only 60 megawatt. This is why our government come with the SWEP. Actually, I'm going in the wrong way. And here we are telling you about the SWEP, which is the scaling up. What is this? Well, actually, I apologize for my English is a little poor. And we'll tell you about what SWEP really means. The objective of this program is initiate and transformation from the underdeveloped, unreliable, and inexpensive fossil fuel-based electricity generation mix to modern and sustainable energy system relying on diverse sources of power. The investment is something about 30 million US dollar. The time frame is 5 years to develop all those stuff we want to. And the program contains like 5 components. What we expect to outcome from this is increase households, businesses, and other institutions electrified with renewable energy, increase both off-grid and on-grid, additional renewable capacity, regulatory instruments developed for renewables scale-up phase, increase government and private sector experience and capacity to develop and operate renewable energy projects in Haiti, increase hands-on experience and capacity of university graduates specializing in renewable energy, a pool of trained technicians in rural areas, displacement of diesel and kerosene to reduce the gas emission and local pollution. Keep going wrong with this thing, I'm sorry. Here are the components of SREP I was talking about. Is the first one is renewable energy for Port-au-Prince. It is the metropolitan area, our big grid, actually the biggest one, and this is where we have most of our connection for all the country. It's something like 70% of the 30% I told you about previously. It is supporting the country's first grid connected viable renewable energy project or projects, wind or solar PV, totaling 10 to 20 megawatt peak, feeding into EDH main grid serving the Port-au-Prince metropolitan area. Actually, EDH is the public utility which provide electricity in IT. We do produce a part of our consumption, we distribute and we transport the energy. And I am working for this utility. Renewable for demonstration remote grid, demonstrate and integrate approach of hybridizing largely diesel-powered grids with renewable energy. The third component, off-grid electricity for household, productive, and social uses, supporting promising off-grid business models. It is like Kenya is looking for equality from urban and rural. And actually, I must say that in IT, we almost have no electricity in the rural part of our country. Rehabilitation of small hydro plants, restore EDH small and mini hydro plants to their full capacity. And the fifth component is building enabling framework capacities and skills for renewable energy scale-up. It's creating an enabling framework and local skills for renewable projects. And here is the funding at IP stage. You can see renewable energy for the metropolitan area. It will be something like $10 million from the World Bank and the IFC. Renewable energy for Porte remote grid. Actually, Porte is the place where we used to have a wind farm, but it doesn't work anymore. So we are trying to have it back in some PV solar system too. It will be 2 to 4 million of investment. Off-grid electricity, it's something like 15 to 17 million from the World Bank and IFC. And enabling framework, the fifth part, it will be 1 million from the World Bank. Actually, we don't have any funding from World Bank or IFC for small hydropower rehabilitation. And we are having this co-financing from public and World Bank and IFC and sometimes IDB too, which we can see here. It will be 6 million for the first component, 10 million for the second one, 8 million third, 4 million for, let's say that 8 million from World Bank and IDA, and 11.5 from World Bank and CTF. And for small hydropower, we will have World Bank 4 million, and public sector it will be something like 40 million. For the fifth component, we have 2.5 million from IDA and World Bank, and 0.5 million from CTF World Bank, and which give us something like 30.5 million from World Bank and IDA, 12 million from World Bank and CTF, 40 million from our public organizations. And we have some private leveraging too, but only for off-grid electricity. Actually, the total leveraging we should have from private public, it's 22 million, 12 million for renewable for the second component, and 94.5 for the third, 18 million for the small hydropower rehabilitation, 3 million for the fifth component, which gave us something like about $150 million to invest in renewable energy there in Haiti. Here we have the preferred part of Killian, the economic analysis. There we have, I'm sorry, having lack of English. But it's the curve of the economic analysis you can see there. And I hope that Killian will help in explaining it. And here, I'm sorry, Georg, but it's a small thing. Maybe you won't be able to see it right. It is giving you a sight of how renewable energy will go over time. Here we are having, the first one is, it's what we call like traditional, we already have. You'll see in time, it's something like a constant going. And for wind power, it is from now it's high, but it will decrease dramatically, as you like to say, in the time. And for solar, it will be more dramatic in the going down. So we have all the scale there, and as I told you, I hope Killian will give you more explanation. And right after this presentation or in the afternoon, with the main presentation about the VRE. So I think this is all I got for you. And this is where you can write us. It's for the Ministry of Energy for Haiti. Thank you very much. Oh, I'm glad no one has any question for me. Oh, come on, Joe.
So if you want, because we still have a little time, I can say something quickly to these two slides. So really just very short, and then Ricardo, will we have first the break or first my presentation? Chile is still coming. Okay, excellent. So I don't want to steal time from our colleagues in Chile. We for the given that this SREP IP is, has been developed by the Haitian government with support from the World Bank, we had to apply standard World Bank economic and financial analysis. And just like we heard from the countries before, that there's currently a lack of readily available tools and methods to do this properly and empirically instead of just, you know, guessing. Again, it's not just emerging markets that have been guessing. This is the way it was in Germany and Spain and other countries. We just said, well, we want 20% by such and such, and now let's start to bring the cost down. Yeah, exactly. So let's start to bring the cost down, and those were the two aims, right? By now we are beyond that. We are in a new era of on-grid renewables, but there are no readily usable decision tools for governments to guide this development. So we had to develop some and assemble some from other sources and put them all together, and Haiti is kind of a model country just like Ghana and others we will see later today. So there's 3-4 countries that have been leading this process on trying to apply more empirical tools, both sophisticated ones and simple ones, to do this economic and financial analysis and decide precisely what Ghana and Kenya asked for in the two previous presentations. How much wind and how much PV should I do next year, and how much should I better defer to 5 years later? And these two graphs show a more empirical analysis, and the next graph shows a mix of a qualitative and quantitative financial analysis. So on the right side, this is a traditional tool that we have only adapted a little bit. And on the x-axis, you see the aggregate capacity that could be installed in terms of additional hydro, PV and wind in Haiti. Okay, and then we have modeled the levelized energy cost if you did all of that today. Right. So to the right, the more wind sites, for instance, you use, or the more hydro sites you use, or even for PV to some extent, the more expensive it will get, right? So the y-axis shows you the LEC, or LCOE, the levelized energy cost, if you did it right now, okay? So you see that most of the renewables currently would be at around 20 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's more expensive than, let's say, in an auction in Chile or in Brazil today, but that's because Haiti is starting, right? And you have a higher country risk, right? But the moment you go to really difficult sites, you see that the cost goes even higher up. The interesting thing about Haiti is that by contrast to all the countries we've heard up to now, the top curve, the brown curve and the black curve, they show the incumbent technologies, the thermal generation that exists in Haiti today. So the one curve that goes from 20 cents to 30 cents, maybe you can point on it, that brown curve. Yes, exactly, that one. That curve goes... I have another one, yeah. That one, that curve shows EDH's existing generation park, right? So you see that it's far more expensive than the ones you have in your countries, even for the what you could call baseload, right? Because they only have this small hydro, and the rest is expensive imported diesel fuel, right? And this black curve, that's even more interesting, shows you that in Port-au-Prince, given the current capacity shortages, you all know there was the earthquake, there's a lot of problems that Haiti had, and it's just emerging from. A lot of the users who can afford it, whether it's hotels or small supermarkets, they have bought cogeneration, right? They have their own gensets, some small ones, which are really expensive and cost $1.50, right? And down to around 35 cents per kilowatt hour. And these are not just individual small ones. The total capacity of all of these is the same amount, the same capacity that the utility has for the same area. So this is what would be replaced by and large by renewables. On the left side, and that's what I'll explain this afternoon, we actually started for different fuel prices to model the optimal amount to introduce during the time of the project of wind and PV, right? On the next slide, this is a mix of quantitative considerations for the financial analysis on the left side and more qualitative considerations on the right side. This is why we worked with those visual indicators. Here, for instance, you see the risk that each of these different technology options and business models that we looked at for Haiti would be faced by an investor, right? So the risk of a hydro investor is much lower than the risk for a wind investor, and the risk of a solar investor who uses business model A is lower than the risk of a solar investor who uses the other one. And because of this risk, if you add the country risk of Haiti, you get different financial weighted average capital costs that you have to assume in your financial analysis to calculate the levelized cost of energy, right? That he needs to charge to actually make a business out of it, right? So this is the left. And on the right, I like this a lot, and I'll pick it up in my presentation later on today. I like a lot to remind ourselves of the general trends that are different for these technologies, because that's what, if the government is like you as a household, and you want to decide, you need a new TV, and you know there's plasma TVs, there's LED TVs, and there's OLED TVs, right? The decision on whether you wait another year and you tell your wife, well, we don't buy it, you can be happy, or whether you really want it, it also depends on how the costs are coming down of these different options. Maybe if you know that next year it will be cool to buy a 4K TV that has everything you always wanted, so you wait another year, right? And it's the same a little bit with wind and solar. Wind is very site dependent, but PV is very time dependent. So and then to end, the benefits, this green column, as we'll see in my presentation, also depend heavily on the share you insert in your system. So this is a visual way. It's different for different countries, but the general trend here is similar in most countries. It will determine your political decision. So this is what we did, and the government looked at it, and based on this informed, on these decision tools, it took an informed decision on how much off-grid they want in this SRAP IP, how much wind they want, how much PV they want, how much hydro they want. So they were able to shop based on not insufficient information, but really take a well-informed decision. That's the idea of this. And in that way, Haiti was kind of a leading case doing this for the first time.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a question here.
Maybe can you comment more on the risk? You have put some comments on risk there. The public sector, I think in the first one, the hydro, the public sector has no off-taker risk. Private IPP would need de-risking. Maybe can you explain how maybe you arrive at maybe the public sector? I mean that assumption that the off-taker has no risk and all that. Just for me to understand.
We'll do it in 2 steps, okay? Because I don't want to. I'll explain it a little more in my presentation. But to cut it short, we applied the same methodology you've seen on Tuesday for our off-grid market analysis, right? So we have looked first at Haiti as a country compared to others, and looked at their country risk premium and at the equity risk premium that an investor would want to recover, if you will, if he would invest in a company in Haiti, right? Maybe not UDH, but a different company that's publicly traded. So that's the basis of this, right? And then if you look at different business models, depending on the contractual situation and the legal situation in Haiti, a private player opposed to, for instance, UDH doing it, right? It takes on a different amount of risk for each of these technologies. For instance, if UDH does a solar or a wind plant, they can be relatively secure that there will be no additional hurdles for in terms of curtailment, right? And they have a pretty good knowledge of the way the system is operated, so they have to apply a relatively low premium to this insecurity, which is the off-taker risk, right? So they have less of an off-taker risk. To put it simple, if it was just one government, not Haiti now, right? One government with a good old state-owned utility that does everything, I'm not saying that should be done, but they wouldn't have any risk, only the technology risk, only the risk that they miscalculated the variable renewables issue, right? But besides that, if they stay under a safe amount, for instance, then they will know that nobody will trick with their own contract. Considered some still that was in the law. If I'm a wind IPP and I'm the first to invest in Haiti, there are several who are interested, both for wind and for PV, and who are already talking to the government and who want to access this SRAP IP or other sources to make it happen, right? Especially in the case of Haiti, because there's this large diaspora, so there is a lot of kind of entrepreneurial money there that's ready. This is what we saw in the slides we did with Georg Hille, and I will show it again in a while. If you're the early mover, even in Germany, the first PV guys didn't really know what they get into, so they have a high perceived risk and therefore a high weighted average capital cost, and that kind of melts down over time if the government does their job properly. Everything with this total absolute volume of investment will be discounted still with a high risk premium that early movers apply. Whereas if you start early but small instead of waiting, right, you already start building a track record and people start trusting and they will apply a lower risk premium. Obviously the other part is the amounts of licenses, the amounts of license steps. If you look at the transactions more closely, you will see that you can change your legal system and make it more amenable to investors, and that's also. And then the other thing we said for the solar is that somebody who puts it on a hotel or a company who puts solar on their premises, in part to serve their own load, and only in a smaller part to feed it into the grid and sell it either to EDH or others. Let's call it net metering or fuel saver case, right, with different shares. He has a smaller share of that off-taker risk because he's his best off-taker himself, and he's hedged in a way, right? So he can only lose a part of his investment, whereas the guy who basically really is a classic IPP and doesn't have any on-site demand is kind of fully at the whim of the off-taker, and therefore the risk is higher. So those are the simple considerations. It's not rocket science. It's just starting to put numbers to these things that you know already, and then start to play with it. A little bit like with the tool kit we saw two days ago.
Okay, so we thank Karin once more. Thank you, Karin.
Yes.
And we now move to Chile.
Okay, let's start with the Chilean case. The on-grid situation of PV in general in Chile and a general view of the country as well. In terms of general information about Chile, well, we are a relatively big surface country, 750,000 square kilometers, more or less. But we're relatively low population. We are only 18 million. So, and basically almost 60% of the population is concentrated in the Santiago region in the central part of the country. And the particular shape of our country, very thin and long, gives us the condition of several different kind of weathers, of climate. In the north we have strong desert conditions, the most extreme desert conditions in the world, in fact. We have the driest desert in the world. Then in the center of Chile we have basically template weather, similar to California could be, for example. And then in the south we have almost like Norway, ice and snow and very extreme cold conditions. That's our GDP, $250 billion a year, roughly. That means basically between $15,000 I think average income per capita. Economic evolution of our country in the last years, it's a little performing not too well, our economy, basically because of we depend strongly still on copper production, and copper price has been down in the last years, inflation going up. But anyway, it's a country with relatively stable economic conditions and also stable political conditions, so in terms of country risk, it's a relatively low-risk country, still. In terms of electric consumption per capita, it's interesting to know that we have still space to grow. In comparison with other developed countries, we have a lot to grow still. Our average consumption per capita in terms of electric consumption is, I would say, relatively low. But in terms of Latin American standards, we are basically the highest. Regarding our power system, our energy system, well, we discussed a little bit about this last Monday. We have basically 4 different interconnected systems. 2 of them, the SIN in the north and the SIC in the center, are the biggest one, largest one. The northern system is basically focused to serve industry, to serve mining. So it's most of 90% of the consumption goes to mining facilities, and also because this is a very desertic area, it's low populated. So the residential consumption is very slow, very low. And instead, in the central integrated system is a mix between residential and industrial. And northern system we will see with more detail afterwards. Here is the composition of the systems. The central system, you see, is a combination between hydro and thermal, and in the case of the northern system, is basically completely thermal because there is no water available. So, and in the total country, we have a combination between basically hydro and thermal, with it's starting to appear also with renewables, solar and wind. We will see with more detail in this next slide. In terms of absolute numbers, this is the composition of both systems. We see an important participation of coal in both, particularly in the zinc system. Then also natural gas, and also we start to see some the participation of wind and solar. You can see, for example, in the case of the central system, we have almost 800 megawatts of wind capacity installed, 90 in the northern system. And in the case of solar, we have already, at the date of this table, which varies every month, we have 580 megawatts of solar capacity installed in the central system, basically in the north part of the central system, and then we have 160 megawatts installed in northern system in zinc. This is the actual condition. This is a very actual to date. The actual condition of all the renewables in our country. You can see that now wind, it's the source with higher participation. We have 900 megawatts in operation, but only 220 under construction. And solar, we have up to date 747 megawatts in operation in all the country, more than 2 gigawatts under construction. So that shows us the potential that solar has in our country. And the third column, you can see all the projects that are not in construction, but have all the permissions, are approved. We could say are ready to build, but many of them, of course, are looking for financing, and not probably will all of them be built. But you can see the huge pipeline of projects that are coming, especially in solar, more than 10 gigawatts. Of course, this is, let's say, theoretical, because many of them will not be built because they will not get financing, but tells us about the solar potential that we have in our country. Anyway, you can see that probably during the next 2 or 3 years, when all these projects under construction will be already in operation, we will have more than 3 gigawatts, or around 3 gigas of solar already in operation in the country. Talking about the generation mix, how has all in terms of energy produced, how is the composition? This is the central integrated system, which has relatively high participation of hydropower. You see the base, the purple part is run-of-river. We have relatively very good conditions for run-of-river in our country because we have the mountains and then the ocean, and in a short distance we have a very high difference of height. So it's a high potential for run-of-river. But this has been very stable because we have not developed many new capacity in that part. Then you have coal. Coal is very similar. Then we have starting here some wind and some solar. The participation is still low because many of these capacity that we all see in the previous charts, it's relatively new. In fact, many of these megawatts have been installed even this year. So that's why participation still is small. In the northern system, you see instead the big composition of coal. Most of the system is based on coal, and as well as natural gas, right?
There you can see the cut of the natural gas from
Yeah, because yes, that's important to gas is this one, right? Yeah. So yes, we invested a lot in combined cycle plants based on gas, in gas imported from Argentina. It's important to point out that in our country we have absolutely none production of own fossil fuels. All the oil, coal, and gas that we use is basically 98% imported. We have some small production of gas and oil and coal down in the south, in Magallanes region, but it's not of good quality and very difficult and expensive to bring that gas to the north of the country. So basically all our fossil fuels are imported. In terms of growth of the electric generation in the SIG system, you can see that we're growing, but the rate of growth it's going down. Basically, this is because one of the major drivers of our the energy demand is copper production, and the copper price today is not doing so well. So this has an impact on energy demand. You can see also the impact here in 2010 of the earthquake, the big earthquake that we had in February, end of February 2010. So that generated an impact in the energy demand. In terms of new added capacity in renewable energy, you can see the bars are new capacity added each semester, I think. Yeah. And the blue one is wind, and the yellow bars are solar. And you can see that many of these capacities that we saw in the previous slides have been added in the last year or so. So, and wind was, let's say, the champion one year ago. Now it is solar, and this is the accumulated capacity in total of all the non-conventional energy. We have also some biomass and runoff river, but with less impact. Runoff river is interesting to comment that even if we have a very high capacity, several gigawatts, we will see later on that, but it's rather difficult to develop because it's located in the south, and in general the environmental impact even of small runoff river plants, it's considerable. I mean, so the work, they have to work with communities, and also some areas populated by natives and indigenous with indigenous interests. It's relatively difficult to build this runoff river plants. Instead, solar and wind are having less difficulties from that point of view, and so that makes it easier to develop. This is the case of the northern system. You see more or less the same condition. Solar and wind added in the last year or so. Now, in the energy price and auction part, I will give the floor to my colleague, which is an expert in that part, and explain it.
Well, regarding energy prices, we have to distinguish two kinds of markets in Chile. First of all, I'm going to show the differences between the southern system, the SIC, and the SING. And you can see that because of the main participation of coal in the northern system, prices have been mainly low, and due to the fluctuations due hydrology, the amount of rain and water that we have in the dams in the southern system, we can see large fluctuations in the market, which where the generation companies inter-exchange energy. The end clients don't see these prices because this is a spot price market. Eventually, in 2018, these two systems will be interconnected, and we expect that these two prices are going to converge around some level around 100. This is a specific zoom into the northern a part of the southern system, the SIC, and we can see a price comparison between Alto Jahuel, which is basically the city center where all the consumption is, and the northern part where all the renewable is. And the trend during the last years is to go down. These are the high prices that activated investment decisions for renewables in the northern part of Chile. And due to the increase of installed capacity, basically 1.1 gigawatts of wind and solar in almost 2 years, prices in the spot market, again, are going down. And if we do a specific focus on the prices that solar energy sees, because the last slides only showed average daily or monthly prices, which consider daily and nightly hours, but solar doesn't generate during the night, except for CSP. We can see that due to this inrush of installed capacity in the northern system, solar projects are seeing basically prices up to $20 a megawatt hour effectively. Regarding a bilateral contract or PPAs market, the average industrial cost during the last years have been around $104 a megawatt hour. And if we do a specific, well, here we have a comparison against Peru because it's our main competitor regarding mining industry. That's why this is the comparison that we have to do, because if we have low prices of copper and high energy prices, all the investors or the mining operators are going to flee to Peru, which is right away aside, and they have really lower energy prices. And if we do assume to specific mining PPAs, we can see that against our competitors, our mining competitors, we have the most expensive mining industry in the world. So that's hitting us right now, and you can see that in the economic growth indices. Regarding energy auctions, we have to, I'm going to start first with the regulated clients, and this is the basic exercise that a regulator does. He has a demand projection of demands. He has in the red color the present contracts that are operating, but as time passes, you can see that those PPAs are going to mature. So you can see in yellow and in green the decision for auctions, the short-term decision of auctions that are activated. For example, the yellow bar was the auction made last September, I think, and the green bar is the energy that is going to be taking part in the auction next year on April. And this triangle is the famous non-contracted regulated client energy. And these are going to be mid-term and long-term auction decisions that will be activated. These are the results of during the last auctions, regulated auctions that have been taking place in Chile. You can see that the price, this is an index price up to date right now of the offers, and you can see that the prices were fairly low, then they went up. This is the date sort of when they were auctioned. They went up and then they went down. They went up mainly because there was a huge run-of-river project, almost 2.5 gigawatts in the south of Chile, and no one knew if that project was going to come online or not. There was a really huge discussion regarding the environmental impact. All the ministers were talking about it. So basically, if you won an auction as a coal plant, and then this plant comes online, you would be out of business right away. So we had like 4 years of uncertainty, and that exactly. So this uncertainty is hitting us right now with high energy prices of contracts. So uncertainty can be really dangerous in a market as ours, for example. And specifically during the last two auctions, this one, the 2013, 03, 2, and this one, the regulator saw that as a way for incentivizing or promoting renewable energy, he grabbed from, let's say, the 100% of the energy, he selected, okay, from this 100% of volume of energy, I'm going to select 10% of that energy, and that 10% of energy is going to have this scheme. I'm going to divide that PPA, and it's not going to be a 24-hour PPA. So my clients are not going to, I'm not going to having costs of energy withdrawal throughout the entire day. I'm going to divide that energy into a solar block. So if I'm solar, I can win this block, and I don't have to I don't have to worry about the demands that are going to take here and here. So the main block was divided in solar, peak, and non-solar and non-peak. So in this way, we could promote the competition for solar energies, and this is a typical solar profile in the northern part of Chile, and this is a typical wind profile in the northern part of the SIC system. So firstly, the regulators saw which kind of resources they had, and then they modified a little bit the auction scheme so they could promote the entrance of these technologies. Although these auctions were technology neutral, a coal plant could come and say, hey, I can offer, for example, $75 a megawatt hour for the entire block, and if the average price of this coal plant was cheaper than the renewables, then the coal plant would win. But that's not the case. For example, wind projects during the last auction won the entire 24-hour blocks due to the use of different portfolios of generation profiles throughout the system, which is very, very interesting. Aela won the last auction, or a really large portion of the auction, using wind in the north, wind in the south, so he could have a generation profile almost constant, in theory. So we're expecting, as you can see, the last auction decreased a lot the average price of energy due to the use of this strategic optimization of wind portfolio specifically. And also very, very cheap solar. $64.8 a megawatt hour was the cheapest offer, considering that you have the spot market risk, which is really interesting. And so I'm expecting what is going to happen here, because this is going to be the biggest auction in the short term for solar projects and renewable projects in Chile. And this would be a curve of the typical, this is a projection of the demand, and you can see the PPAs that are already maturing, but are already running. These are short-term bids that need to be taken, and this is the future market for renewable energies. This is like a typical regulatory exercise that has to be done. I will let you again, Marco.
Okay, now let's talk a little bit about radiation conditions. In terms of solar radiation, well, we have the highest level of radiation in the Atacama Desert in terms of kilowatt hours per square meter a day. That's basically because in the desert we have very dry conditions, meaning we have an average of less than 30 days, 30 cloudy days, and for the same reason, related to this, by 2020 we will have 70% of the astronomical observation capacity worldwide installed in northern Chile because of the same condition, right? Our very dry skies.
There are places in Chile, in the northern Chile, that haven't seen rain for 100 years. Yeah. So.
Well, worldwide, comparing different desertic zones worldwide, also you can see that desert of Atacama has the highest level. This, of course, it's an advantage, but at the same time, it's a risk, because as we have commented in these past days, all solar systems have not been proven enough time in these conditions. So we have experience in, Northern Europe, in southern Spain, Germany, some places in probably the MENA region, Middle East, Northern Africa. But here in the desert of Atacama, all these big megawatts that we saw in these tables before are not more than 1-2 years of operation. So what will happen in 5 years from now, 10 years from now, no one knows. And another important condition also is that, well, the lack of water and being a desertic area, soiling is a major challenge. We have to clean these plants. We have to clean them several times a year, because you can see in short period, if you don't clean the plant, you can see degradation in production. So cleaning is a challenge because we have no water, and we are talking about big plants, very, very extensive. So in terms of solar radiation, but probably in football we are not the champions of the world, but in solar radiation we do. So that's this is this is an interesting study that GIZ did for Chile a couple of years ago, analyzing feasible. That means projects that could be potentially actually be built in the three major non-conventional renewable energy sources: photovoltaic, solar in general, both photovoltaic and CSP, hydro, basically run-of-river, and wind. And you see that the total number, it's not here, but it was more than 1 million megawatts of capacity potential to be installed. And well, of course, you have basically solar divided in PV and CSP in the northern part of Chile. Then you have some also wind, some spots with very good wind in the north. Then you have, of course, the run-of-river. You can see this is basically mountain area, very humid. We have a lot of water here. And also wind, very good wind in the coastal part of the country, also in the south. So in terms of non-conventional energy potential, we could not only supply energy for our needs, but also we could export a lot of energy. Well, we will discuss with more detail about this map tomorrow, but you can see that this is a location of all the most of the PV projects that we have today actually in operation or under construction or approved in northern Chile. And you can see that we are in the same line as, for example, this is here. We have Sao Paulo here, we have Itaupu around here. So we could think in an interconnected system and in, I don't know, storing energy here. There is a lot of water, and generating energy during the day here. So this could be like a long-term vision. Probably we will discuss more about this tomorrow. Just for finishing, these are some examples of PV plants already in operation in Chile. This is a very small plant, but I wanted to put this as an example because this was one of the first plants that was connected to the system. It's a 3 megawatt plant installed in a city called Vicuña. It's about 500 kilometers north of Santiago. That was inaugurated in the first stage in 2012, and then in a second stage in 2014 it went up to 3 megas. Then we have a plant, a 70 megawatt plant in El Salvador. This is in the Diego Almagro area, in the area in which, as Gonzalo commented a few moments ago, it's sometimes of the day they have zero price because there is no capacity for getting that energy to the south. This is the cleaning system that this plant uses with a robot. Another plant from San Edison, San Andres, 50 megawatts. Same plant. Also near Diego Almagro in the northern SIC. You can see the surroundings are completely desertic, not a single plant or tree or nothing, but soil. All of this is dusty, so difficult to clean. That's it. And we're open to questions.
Thank you, Marco and Gonzalo. Do we have questions from the audience?
I know there are a few questions because all want to go to the coffee. But one thing is important, and I want to know how that's in Chile. In the auctions, how many years you have time to hook up, to install and to hook up your PV system to the grid? Because the offer depends only if you have 1, 2, 3 or 4 years for that, because it's a bet for the future costs of PV.
You do have a window. I think that you have the detail.
We basically copied a little bit the Brazilian system. So this let me show the graphic. So the regulator is performing this every now and then, this kind of exercise, knowing every single month he's doing, or every single semester he's doing demand projections and understanding what's going to happen with these auctions. And for the auction the prior auction, they had almost 1 year to develop the project, because the auction was made today, one and a half year, and they have to start operation in 2017. And the auction prior to that one was made on December. In December they gave their offers, and the auction was for 2016, 17, 18, and 19. And the next auction on April is going to be for 2021. So it's going to be a large time window there.
Stay there. I have a question for you both. In all these auctions, both wind and solar that have been happening in Chile, where is the money coming from? Is this local money? Is this overseas money? The local content, is there any requirement for local content? What is the mix of funding that is funding all these enterprises?
Everywhere.
There's no local content required. Chilean banks, well, Corbanca, Santander, the typical banks are the ones that fund this kind of projects.
But we would say that the origin of funding is from everywhere. I mean, both Chilean banks, international banks based in Chile, like Santander, for instance, or also Chilean original banks like Corbanca, like Vice Bank. They are owned by Chilean original investors, and they are investing heavily in renewables, along with international funding coming to Chile as well. I mean, our market is very, very open. So,
Japanese, Sumitomo, Ring Capital.
Yeah. And the equipment is all also being brought from overseas.
Basically, yes. So far, there are no specific conditions in terms of local content or nothing. Also, there's a big participation of Enel. Enel, the Italian group, is one of the largest producers in Chile as well.
So on the where the money comes from, we should all remember, and we haven't discussed that during the last days, the big advantage we have now as opposed to 5 years ago or 10 years ago, when we talk about finding funding for wind and PV, not just in Chile but worldwide, including Germany, is not only that the costs have come down, but the alternative investment opportunities for large institutional investors and smaller but profit-oriented professional investors have vanished, right? They don't have secure alternatives anymore the way they did 5 or 10 years ago. So you see that in Europe, in Germany, for instance, now if you want to buy a German bond, you only get 0.5% interest rate, right? We saw that the other day in our slide. And that has an impact because you have all these institutional investors, especially insurance companies, who have to reinvest money that's liberated every year, and they need a mix of return and relative low risk, which Chile offers. So that's why you have this immense pressure, if you will, a disbursement pressure that you can use as a country if you create the right conditions.
That's the idea.
Okay, thank you. We are going to break now for coffee break at 12 noon. We should take 15-20 minutes maximum, and then we have still our morning session. Kilian is presenting the toolkit, and then Tobias and myself are going to talk a little bit about capacity building, and this will be the end of the morning session. We will push lunch for 2 p.m. Okay, and then in the afternoon we have the practitioners' experiences being brought here. We will have another chance, or Marco and Gonzalo will speak more extensively about Chile and the Condominio Solaris concept tomorrow. So the Chile topic will come back to this table here. So we break now, and thank you very much for the moment.